In the heart of cities like Paris, Milan, and New York, fashion moves like a storm, fast, glittering, and seemingly insatiable. Trends shift faster than the seasons, with fast fashion stores releasing new collections every week, which at first glance seem like a celebration of creativity. But sadly, these garments, stitched by unknown hands, shipped thousands of miles, displayed in windows, then bought and forgotten, eventually pile up into a foul, overwhelming mass of waste, burdening both the ecosystem and the economy. It all begins with what is known as fast fashion, an industry that promises affordable, ever-changing styles but has become the largest contributor to textile waste in the world. The fashion industry produces an astonishing amount of clothing, far beyond what people need in their daily lives. Every year, it's estimated that 100 billion garments are manufactured globally. Ironically, around 92 million tons of this ends up as waste in landfills. That means every single second, one truckload of clothing is discarded into garbage dumps. If this trend continues unchecked, annual textile waste is expected to soar to 134 million tons by the end of this decade. A study by McKinsey revealed that, on average, people wear their clothes only 7 to 10 times before moving on to something new. This wear rate has dropped by over 35% in the past 15 years. In other words, clothing that once lasted years is now worn for only weeks or months before ending up in the trash. In some developed countries, clothes are discarded while still looking new, trapped in a cycle of instant consumption that never knows the word enough. One major driver of this problem is the increasingly rapid fashion cycle. Every week, or even every few days, store shelves are refreshed with the latest collections. To keep up, manufacturers produce in massive volumes, try and match the constantly shifting tastes of consumers. As a result, excess stock piles up. Many items go unsold, even after steep discounts. Some major brands have even been caught destroying or burning brand new clothing rather than storing or donating them. The mountains of brand new clothes being incinerated only add to the irony. Natural resources and energy were extracted and spent to make these garments, only for them to be burned, never worn even once. To make matters worse, fast fashion items are often low in quality, made hastily from cheap materials. They break down easily or fall out of style within months, giving them very short lifespans. Consumers are then pushed to buy more and more, fueling a vicious buy where dispose cycle that continues to swell the volume of textile waste. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, about 85% of all textiles consumed in the United States end up in landfills every year. The average American contributes roughly 37 kilograms of clothing waste annually. This overproduction comes with huge environmental costs. The fashion industry, from fiber production, fabric making, to clothing distribution, consumes massive amounts of natural resources. It accounts for nearly 10% of global carbon emissions, more than the combined output of international flights and shipping. Fast fashion is also extremely water intensive. Millions of cubic meters of water are used in cotton farming, dyeing, and washing processes. For example, making a single pair of jeans requires about 7,500 liters of water, from irrigating cotton fields to dyeing the fabric. Unsurprisingly, the United Nations reported in 2019 that the fashion industry is responsible for 20% of global industrial wastewater. That means 1/5 of industrial water pollution worldwide comes from garment factories processing and dyeing our clothes. Even more alarming is the fact that much of modern clothing is made from synthetic, plastic-based fibers. About 60% of fashion industry textiles are derived from plastic materials like polyester, nylon, and acrylic. That means your favorite polyester shirt or dress is essentially wearable plastic, destined to become plastic waste. These synthetic fabrics do not biodegrade. Instead of decomposing, They break down into tiny pieces that pollute the environment for hundreds of years. Excess production also means massive resource waste. Imagine the land, water, petroleum, electricity, and labor invested in making clothes, only for them to be discarded. The UN Economic Commission for Europe reports that 85% of textiles end up in landfills each year. That's billions of dollars worth of resources thrown away. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation even reported that the global fashion industry loses over $100 billion worth of materials annually due to low recycling rates. In fact, less than 1% of textile materials are recycled into new clothing. The rest becomes waste or is downcycled into lower value products. Thus, the fast fashion industry has created mountains of unused clothing, sparking a global waste crisis, especially in developed countries. But the journey of discarded clothing doesn't end in local landfills. Because the volumes are too massive, textile waste from the West often seeks escape elsewhere. Rotten piles of clothing are still on the move, often disguised as charitable donations or secondhand trade. Many people in developed nations feel good about decluttering their closets, imagining their used clothes will benefit the less fortunate. But the truth is not so rosy. Investigations show that only a small fraction of donated clothing is actually reused by local communities. According to The Guardian, on average, only about 20% of clothing donated to charity shops in developed countries is sold locally. The remaining 80% piles up overwhelming donation centers. To avoid the cost of recycling or landfilling, many charities and textile recycling companies opt to sell their excess clothing to international wholesale traders. Labeled as donations to the poor or humanitarian aid, containers filled with hundreds or even thousands of sacks of secondhand clothes are exported abroad, mainly to developing countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So what's marketed as charity is often just a way to dump the problem elsewhere. These used clothes are shipped far away, seemingly out of sight, only to land in someone else's backyard. And during this export process, clothing is often sorted and packed with little transparency. In Europe, many textile recycling firms sort donations, taking high-end branded items to sell in local vintage stores or export to secondhand boutiques in rich countries for profit. The rest, low-quality, worn-out clothing, is tightly baled in plastic and sold cheaply to traders for resale in Africa or Asia. Developing countries often receive the leftovers of the global fashion industry. Clothes that couldn't be sold in charity shops, whether because they're stained, damaged, or simply too abundant, are exported to the global south under the label of aid. In truth, it's a cheap way for wealthy nations to offload their fashion waste. One vivid case emerged from a 2023 Reuters investigation in Singapore. The country had launched a used shoe collection program, claiming it would recycle sports shoes into materials for playgrounds, an initiative that sounded noble and eco-friendly. But the investigation uncovered that instead of being recycled, the donated shoes were secretly shipped to Indonesia for resale. The scandal caused a stir. Singaporeans felt betrayed, realizing their good intentions had been abused. Meanwhile, the Indonesian government was outraged that their country was being used as an illegal dumping ground for secondhand goods. This case is just one example of how donation schemes can be manipulated into backdoor trade. Scrap dealers profit financially by exporting goods, while recipient countries are flooded with unwanted waste. The trade in secondhand clothing is often masked as an economic opportunity. Poorer countries receive cheap clothes they can resell at higher prices, drawing small traders into the business. Indeed, this market has given rise to grassroots economic activity. In Kenya, for instance, millions of people are involved in the supply chain, from large-scale importers and agents to market vendors and scavengers who collect leftover fabric to upcycle. Some ambitious traders even rise to become major distributors or exporters to neighboring countries. Secondhand garments also spur services like tailoring and specialty laundries to refresh used clothing. Affordable prices help low-income families allocate their money to other needs. There's an argument that such imports improve consumer welfare. However, many of the donated clothes that arrive are in unwearable condition. According to the Changing Markets Foundation, traders in Kenya reported that 20 to 50% of secondhand clothing bales are completely unsellable, either due to damage, improper sizing, or cultural mismatch. Many open the bales to find moldy, stained, or torn clothes. Some even arrive dirty, covered in sweat or vomit. This is the harsh reality faced by secondhand sellers in developing countries. In effect, they gamble on these mystery bales. A Ghanaian activist called this a toxic gift from the developed world. In Ghana, secondhand clothes are nicknamed Broniwawu, meaning dead white man's clothes, a sarcastic term implying that these are leftovers no longer valued by Western donors. Worse still, the secondhand trade often involves deceptive practices, such as mislabeling containers as humanitarian aid or recyclable textiles, when in fact they're packed with commercial resale goods. Some unscrupulous exporters even mix non-textile waste into clothing bales, leaving recipient countries to shoulder the burden of separating and disposing of worthless trash. Worryingly, the volume of exported used clothing is rising. The European Union, for example, doubled its secondhand textile exports from 550,000 tons in 2000 to nearly 1.7 million tons in 2019. This drastic surge reflects how Western nations increasingly rely on foreign markets to absorb their surplus garments. North America is no different. Millions of tons of secondhand clothing are exported annually from the U.S. and Canada to Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. The world's top recipient countries include Pakistan, Malaysia, Ghana, Kenya, Benin, Uganda, and Chile. The route these clothes travel can be incredibly complex. A single t-shirt may be made in Bangladesh, sold in Europe, donated in the Netherlands, exported to Tanzania, purchased by a trader, and finally resold in a rural village market, perhaps bought by a local youth drawn to the famous football club logo on the front. This supply chain may seem positive, giving and used items a second life. But hidden costs exist all along the way, environmental, social, and waste-related. Like two sides of a coin, the global secondhand clothing ecosystem brings both benefits and burdens. On one hand, it provides affordable clothing to low-income communities in developing countries. Many people who cannot afford new clothes find decent alternatives in secondhand markets. The trade also sustains millions of livelihoods, from collectors, cargo shippers, wholesalers, vendors, to tailors and laundries. On the other hand, an overwhelming flood of imported used goods disturbs local economies. Imported clothes fiercely compete with domestically made textiles. In many African and Asian countries, the influx of secondhand clothing has been blamed for the collapse of local garment industries. Even more troubling, the environmental impact of used clothing waste spans vast distances, from microscopic particles to massive landfills, from rivers to oceans, from soil to sky. As mentioned earlier, many modern garments are made from synthetic fibers like polyester, acrylic, and nylon. Each time these clothes are washed, hundreds of thousands of microfibers are released into the water. Wastewater treatment plants cannot filter out such fine particles. As a result, an estimated 500,000 tons of textile microplastics enter the ocean each year, accounting for 35% of all primary microplastic pollution in the sea.